It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon in the suburbs, the kind of day where nothing ever seemed to happen. Birds chirped lazily in the trees, and the hum of lawnmowers echoed down the block. But what started as an ordinary day was about to take a turn that no one could have predicted. Especially not Marcus Johnson, a 34-year-old black man who was simply trying to mow his own lawn. Marcus had lived in this neighborhood for 3 years, and while he'd always felt a little out of place, he never imagined that something as simple as maintaining his property would land him in the middle of a nightmare. Enter Karen. Yes. That. Karen. You know the type. The kind of person who always seems to have something to say, even when it's none of her business. She was out walking her dog, a tiny white fluff ball that yapped at everything, when she spotted Marcus. What happened next would leave the entire neighborhood, and eventually, the internet, stunned. Karen didn't say a word to Marcus at first. Instead, she stood there, arms crossed, watching him like he was some kind of intruder. Marcus noticed her, of course. How could he not? Her stare was like a laser beam, cutting through the warm afternoon air. But he kept mowing, figuring she'd move along eventually. She didn't. Instead, she pulled out her phone and started filming him. Marcus stopped the mower, wiped the sweat from his brow, and asked if everything was okay. That's when Karen dropped the bombshell. "I'm calling the police," she said, her voice sharp and cold. "You don't belong here." Marcus was stunned. Didn't belong here? This was his house. He'd bought it with his own money, paid the mortgage every month, and even hosted a block party last summer. But Karen wasn't having it. She was convinced, absolutely convinced, that Marcus was trespassing, and she wasn't going to let it go. The 911 call was quick, but the damage was done. Karen's voice trembled with self-righteous indignation as she told the dispatcher that a suspicious man was on the property, claiming it was his. Marcus could only stand there, his heart pounding, as the weight of the situation settled over him. He'd heard stories like this before. Black men being harassed for simply existing in spaces they had every right to be in. But he never thought it would happen to him. Not here. Not in his own yard. As the minutes ticked by, Marcus tried to reason with Karen, but she wasn't listening. She was too busy playing the hero in her own twisted narrative. And then, just as things seemed like they couldn't get any worse, Marcus noticed something. Something that made his blood run cold. It was small, almost insignificant, but it changed everything. He couldn't believe he hadn't seen it before. What Marcus found out in that moment would turn the entire situation on its head. It was a detail so shocking, so unexpected, that even Karen would be left speechless. But before he could process it, the sound of sirens cut through the air. The police were on their way, and Marcus knew he was about to be thrust into a situation he never asked for. Would the officers believe him? Would they even give him a chance to explain? Or would they side with Karen, the woman who seemed so sure of herself, so convinced that she was in the right? As the sirens grew louder, Marcus made a decision. He wasn't going to back down. Not this time. But what happened next would leave everyone, Karen, the police, and even Marcus himself, questioning everything they thought they knew about justice, fairness, and the length some people will go to when they feel threatened by something they don't understand. The tension in the air was palpable as the first police car rounded the corner. Marcus stood his ground, his mind racing. He knew this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about something bigger, something that had been simmering beneath the surface for far too long. And as the officers stepped out of their car, their eyes scanning the scene, Marcus couldn't help but wonder, how far would this go? What would it take for people like Karen to see him, really see him, as a person, not a threat? The answers to those questions were about to unfold in ways no one could have predicted. But one thing was certain. This wasn't just a story about a man mowing his lawn. It was a story about identity, prejudice, and the unexpected twists that can change everything in an instant. And it was far from over. As the police car pulled up to the curb, Marcus felt a mix of emotions swirling inside him. Anger, frustration, but also a strange sense of determination. He wasn't going to let this moment define him, but he also knew he couldn't ignore what was happening. The officers stepped out, their expressions neutral but cautious. One of them, a tall man with a buzz cut, approached Marcus first. "Sir, we got a call about a disturbance here. Can you tell us what's going on?" Marcus took a deep breath, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm mowing my lawn," he said, gesturing to the mower behind him. "This is my house. I've lived here for 3 years. That woman," he pointed to Karen, who was now standing a few feet away, still clutching her phone, "called the police on me for no reason." Karen didn't wait for Marcus to finish. "Officer, this man is lying," she interjected, her voice shrill. "I've lived in this neighborhood for over a decade, and I've never seen him before. He's clearly trespassing. Look at him." The officer glanced between Marcus and Karen, his face unreadable. Marcus could feel the weight of Karen's words hanging in the air, the unspoken assumptions that came with them. He knew what she was implying, even if she didn't say it outright. And it stung. But before he could respond, the second officer, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped in. "Ma'am, do you have any proof that this man doesn't live here?" she asked Karen. Karen hesitated, her confidence faltering for the first time. "Well, no, but—" she started, but the officer cut her off. "Sir, do you have any ID or proof of residence?" she asked Marcus. Marcus nodded, relief flooding through him. "Yes, I can show you my driver's license and a utility bill," he said, already moving toward the house. But as he turned to go inside, Karen spoke up again. "Wait, what about that?" she said, pointing to the spot in the yard where Marcus had noticed something earlier. He froze, his heart skipping a beat. He'd almost forgotten about it in the chaos of the moment. The officers followed Karen's gaze, their eyes narrowing as they tried to see what she was pointing at. Marcus knew he had to act fast. Whatever was there, it was important. He could feel it in his gut. But before he could say anything, Karen was already marching over to the spot, her dog yapping at her heels. "Look at this," she said, bending down to pick something up. Marcus's mind raced. What had she found? And why did it feel like this small, seemingly insignificant detail was about to change everything? The officers followed Karen, their curiosity piqued. Marcus stayed where he was, his feet rooted to the ground. He wanted to see what she'd found, but he also didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing him react. Karen held up the object triumphantly, her face a mix of smugness and disbelief. It was a small, weathered piece of paper, folded and creased as if it had been buried for years. "What is that?" the male officer asked, his tone cautious. Karen unfolded it carefully, her eyes scanning the words. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then, slowly, a smirk spread across her face. Well, she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "Looks like someone's been keeping secrets." Marcus's stomach dropped. What was on that paper? And how had it ended up in his yard? He had no idea, but the look on Karen's face told him it wasn't good. The female officer took the paper from Karen, her eyes narrowing as she read it. Marcus could see her expression change. First confusion, then surprise, and finally something that looked almost like pity. She glanced at Marcus, then back at the paper, as if she was trying to piece something together. "Sir," she said, slowly, "do you know anything about this?" Marcus shook his head, his throat dry. "No, I have no idea what that is. I've never seen it before." But even as he said the words, he couldn't shake the feeling that this piece of paper was connected to something bigger, something that had been buried, both literally and figuratively, for a long time. Karen, meanwhile, was practically glowing with triumph. "I told you," she said, her voice rising. "I told you there was something off about him. This proves it."